Hi, my name is Ginevra, and to be honest, I always think my name sounds too grand for the life I've been given. I'm 42, and I have a younger brother, Tommaso, my boy, though he's a grown man now, 32, but in my memories, he's still that thin, disheveled teenager with those huge eyes that reflected all the horror of the world back then. When I was 25 and he was only 15, our parents died in a car accident. It happened suddenly, absurdly, the way a house sometimes collapses from a single gust of wind. They were simply gone one morning, and I stood in the hospital corridor, unable to believe I could breathe when there was no one left to wait for home. After their death, everything around me became empty, and the silence of the house became unbearable. Someone had to take care of Tommaso. After all, he was still a child, who had never truly known life or pain. The relatives gathered for a family council. Everyone said the right things, but everyone's eyes were tired and averted. Everyone had their own families, their own worries, their own "we'd love to," but no one wanted to take responsibility for someone else's fate, and I realized I had no choice. I simply took his hand and said, "Let's go home." From that day on, I became his sister, his mother, and the only person he could lean on. Back then, I worked in an ordinary office, not poor, but not abundant either, earning just enough to last one life, my own, but now I needed two, and without thinking, I began to make ends meet as best I could. I worked overtime, took on weekend jobs, wrote reports at night so I could make him breakfast in the morning and see him off to school. I wanted Tommaso not to feel deprived, so that his life wouldn't seem so incomplete after everything that had happened. I bought him fashionable clothes, sneakers that his friends complimented him on, and made sure he always had the latest phone and computer, because I knew teenagers could be cruel to those who weren't quite up to par. Every year, I threw him a birthday party, a real celebration, with balloons, music, friends, and his laughter echoing in my chest, making me feel like maybe I could do it. I saved for his college, putting aside literally every little thing. When the time came, I paid for everything: tuition, books, housing. I even bought him a car so he wouldn't have to rely on buses or random hitchhikers. Meanwhile, I wore an old coat with a hem, ate cheap noodles, and never allowed myself a vacation. I thought, just a little while longer, and then I'll breathe a sigh of relief, but then there was always a new later. When Tommaso graduated from college and got a job, I felt a strange emptiness, as if someone had ripped a piece of my heart out. He moved out, but I continued to help. After all, his salary was modest, and living in the city was expensive. Every month I sent him money, and he called, thanked me, told me I was the best sister in the world, and I believed him. I believed every word, because I wanted to believe him. And then Rachel came along, beautiful, self-assured, with refined manners and the look of a woman who knows how to make her life work. They dated for a long time, 5 years, and when he told me they were engaged, I cried, from happiness, from pride, from exhaustion. I paid for the wedding without a second thought, even though it cost over $20,000. I just wanted Tommaso to be happy. After the wedding, I even gave them $30,000 for a down payment on a house. It's a nice place, a quiet neighborhood, neat houses with green lawns. I thought, this is it, happiness. I've done everything I should. But after the wedding, everything changed. At first, imperceptibly, then painfully. Rachel started coming to my house often. At first, I was happy. I thought she just wanted to get closer, to be my friend, but then I began to notice oddities. Every visit ended with her asking to borrow something: a sweater, shoes, a bag. We wore the same size. And, of course, I didn't refuse. Can I borrow this for a couple of days? I have an event, of course. I smiled, but the days turned into weeks, and my things weren't returned. When I wrote to her, reminding her, she'd reply, "Oh, I forgot," or "I can't find it. I think I left it at Mom's," but there was no next time. And one day, I realized that over the past few months, I'd lost not just a dozen things, but pieces of myself: my favorite blouse, the old bag I'd saved up for 3 months, the shoes I'd bought when I won my first prize. Everything was gone, along with the trust I'd once considered unbreakable. One day, I decided I couldn't keep silent any longer, that it was time to finally put an end to this petty but debilitating theft, which had long since turned from a courtesy into humiliation. Rachel was at my house again, absent-mindedly running her fingers over the soft fabric of my new jacket, the very one I'd bought just a couple of days ago. Finally allowing myself something pretty after years of saving. I stood in the living room doorway and watched her finger the item, as if choosing whether the shade suited it, and suddenly, before I could even be startled by my own voice, I said, "Rachel, you still have my blue blouse, and those black trousers I lent you in the spring, and the gray sweater I gave you in March, remember? I can't give you anything else until you return at least what you've already taken." She turned around slowly, as if she hadn't heard, and her face, smooth and serene, suddenly flushed, her eyes narrowed. "Are you serious?" she muttered, a note of disdain in her voice. "Are you really that greedy?" I took a deep breath, feeling the same feeling I'd suppressed for so many years welling up inside me: fatigue, bitterness, injustice. "I'm not greedy," I replied, trying to speak calmly. "I just want my things back." At that moment, Tommaso entered the room. He was holding a cup of coffee, his expression slightly perplexed, as if he'd stumbled into someone else's scene. "What's going on?" he asked, looking from me to Rachel. She turned to him, her tone instantly changing, and said with a hurt tone in her voice, "Your sister made a scene over some rags. I borrowed a couple of things, and she's acting like I stole something from her." Tommaso sighed and looked at me with a look that suddenly made me see not a brother, but a stranger. "Tired of women's squabbles, Ginevra, come on, don't," he said softly, but distantly. "Don't make a scene, just give her the things. Rachel, you have so many clothes." I felt my insides go cold. "She never gives back what she takes," I managed to say, my voice hoarse, almost childish. Tommaso shrugged. "So what? You can afford to buy more." The words hit me like a slap in the face. Afford? After all those years of starving for him, sewing old clothes, skimping on every little thing, I wanted to shout, to remind him who he had become thanks to me, but I didn't. I simply lowered my eyes and fell silent. I didn't want to fight with my brother. From that day on, I stopped giving Rachel anything. When she asked, I smiled tightly and said the clothes were in the wash, that a friend had the bag she needed, that the shoes had already been promised to someone else. She quickly realized I wasn't going to be her wardrobe anymore, and she started coming over less and less often. The house became quiet again, and, oddly enough, this silence brought relief. Recently, I finally had the money for renovations. I'd been saving for years, putting it aside little by little, and when everything was ready, I allowed myself to feel proud. New furniture, new appliances, a snow-white refrigerator, a shiny oven, a soft sofa in the dusty pink shade I'd dreamed of. I even changed the locks, the old, flimsy ones, for reliable, heavy ones, as if protecting me not only from thieves but also from the past. My old furniture and appliances were in excellent condition. I always took care of things, treating them with respect, because I knew the value of every purchase, and, after thinking about it, I decided that Tommaso and Rachel, who had recently moved into a new house, could use them. I dialed his number. "Hi, Tommy," I said, trying to sound cheerful. "I just bought new furniture and appliances. Maybe you'd like my old stuff? The sofa, the table, the refrigerator, everything is in perfect condition. I just wanted to update it." There was a pause, then I heard a muffled female voice. "Rachel's." She said something, but I couldn't immediately make out the words. Then, clearly, "Tell her we don't want her junk," and then silence again. A second later, Tommaso came back on the line. "Sorry, Ginevra," he said dryly, "we're not interested, we have our own plans for the house." I froze, unsure of what to say, then exhaled. "Fine, no problem." I smiled into the phone so he wouldn't hear the tremor in my voice and hung up. It hurt so much, but I didn't show it. I simply sold all my old things at a garage sale for next to nothing, and for a few days afterward, looking at the empty walls and new furniture, I tried to convince myself that everything was fine. But a week later, when I returned from work, my heart sank. The door lock had been forced open, and it was slightly ajar, as if someone had simply forgotten to close it. I froze in the doorway, feeling the blood rushing in my temples. I slowly pushed the door open, and saw emptiness, absolute, ringing emptiness. There was nothing, no sofa, no TV, no dishes, not even curtains, my new furniture, my appliances. Nothing, everything was gone. The air was heavy, smelling of dust and betrayal. I stood in the middle of the empty house and couldn't breathe. It was as if I'd been robbed not only of my possessions, but also of my meaning. And then I saw a piece of paper stuck to the wall, unevenly, with a piece of tape. I came closer and recognized the handwriting. It was Tommaso's. "Ginevra," it read, "we've moved your furniture and appliances to our home. We need it more than you do. You can buy yourself something later. Thank you, Tommaso. I was still standing in the middle of the empty room, clutching Tommaso's note, when I heard a light, cautious knock on the door. As if someone was afraid to startle me, I instinctively turned around, not immediately realizing that the door was gone, only warped hinges and chipped paint on the floor. Mrs. Russo appeared in the doorway, my neighbor across the street, a gray-haired, perpetually energetic woman of about 70, with kind eyes and a straight back that always reminded me of my mother. "Ginevra, are you okay?" she asked quietly, peering anxiously inside. "I saw your door open, and I was afraid something had happened." She entered the house, looked around, and froze. "Oh my God, everything is gone," she cried, clutching her hands to her chest. I handed her the piece of paper, my fingers still shaking. "This is Tommaso," I said. "He took everything." "Look." Mrs. Russo took the paper, held it up to her eyes, read it, and suddenly pressed her lips together, and her expression changed, and anger, almost maternal, appeared in it. "I saw him here this afternoon," she said. "He had a truck, you know, the white one. With the open back, he was unloading things from your house. I went up to him and asked what he was doing, and he said you gave him permission to take everything he needed." I believed him. God, I believed him. "I'm so sorry, Ginevra." I shook my head. "It's not your fault," I said, feeling a lump in my throat. "He lied to you. He lied to everyone." Mrs. Russo looked confused and determined at the same time. "I have a surveillance camera at home," she said. "It recorded everything. Do you want me to show you?" "Yes," I replied without hesitation. "Of course, I need that video. Thank you." She quickly left and returned a few minutes later with a small flash drive in her hand. I thanked her, squeezing her cool fingers, feeling a sudden weakness wash over me. When the door closed behind her, I sank to the floor in the middle of the empty room, holding the flash drive in my hand. I was bitter that I didn't have a camera or an alarm myself. I'd heard about break-ins in the neighborhood and considered installing a security system, but there were always more important things to do, more pressing expenses. I believed I lived in a world where at least my brother wouldn't betray me, but now, in addition to the recording, I had other evidence, all the receipts for furniture and appliances, bank statements, the photos I'd taken when I first received the delivery. I even had custom-made furniture, custom-made for my home, with my initials burned into the underside of the countertops. I dialed Tommaso's number, and on the second ring he answered. "Hello, Ginevra." His voice was cheerful, even cheerful, as if nothing had happened. "Give me everything back," I said immediately, without greeting. "Give me my furniture, my appliances. You broke my lock, broke into my house, and stole everything I owned." He laughed shortly, dryly. "I didn't steal anything," he said. "I just took a few things you didn't need. You can buy yourself new ones, right?" I felt my hands shaking. "You took everything without asking, Tommaso. That's stealing," I said slowly, as if afraid my voice would break. He sighed irritably. "Don't be dramatic, Ginevra," he said. "You always exaggerate." There was a noise on the line, then a whisper. I heard Rachel's voice. "Give me the phone." There was a slight rustling sound, then her sharp, loud voice. "You should be ashamed of yourself," she screamed. "You have money, Ginevra. We don't. We're barely making it through the mortgage. This was our chance to make the house better." I tried to interrupt, but she didn't give me a chance. "You robbed us," she suddenly shouted, and I was dumbfounded. "We didn't steal it," she continued, almost growling. "We borrowed it. Besides, we already had workers come to remodel the kitchen cabinets to fit our space, so we can't give it back anyway. You have 3 days, then don't call." I said only one thing. "If you don't give it all back, I'll call the police." Her laugh came over the phone, short, dry, like a gunshot. "You won't call," she said mockingly. "You can't. He's your brother," and the connection was cut. I sat in silence, holding the phone in my hands, feeling something break inside me. I raised Tommaso, 17 years. I gave him everything I could, my childhood, my youth, my dreams, my health. I raised him when I was just a girl myself, and now he's taken everything I had. I looked at my phone screen, opened my banking app, and suddenly remembered, I was still paying $1,000 a month on the mortgage on their house. I'd set up auto payment over a year ago to help them when they first moved in. I scrolled down, found the payment, and without thinking, clicked cancel. A message appeared on the screen. "Payment successfully deleted." I sat there, staring at those words, feeling a tear slowly trickle down my cheek. heavy, hot, like the last drop of my former life. The next morning, I woke up early, having barely slept a wink, and, gathering all the documents, the note, the flash drive with the video, and the receipts, I went to see my lawyer. His name was David, and I had already consulted him on business matters several times. He was a reserved, reasonable man, with that calm that inspires confidence even when everything inside you is crumbling. His office was in an old building in the city center, smelling of coffee and paper, and soft morning light streaming through the tall windows. When I walked in, David rose from his desk, motioned for me to sit down, and immediately realized that something serious had happened to me. I told him everything, without holding back, without missing a single detail, about how I'd returned home to find emptiness, how I'd read Tommaso's note, how Rachel had laughed into the phone, how I'd calmly canceled the auto payment that had kept their household running. David listened silently, leaning forward slightly, not interrupting, only nodding occasionally. Then I showed him the videos, the photos, the receipts, everything that could confirm my words. He stared at the screen for a long moment, then exhaled heavily. "This is clearly theft, Ginevra," he finally said, "but let's do this the right way. First, document everything, photograph the broken lock, make a list of everything that's missing, and then we'll wait 3 days. You gave him that time. After all, if he doesn't return the property, we'll file a police report." He immediately sat down at the computer and wrote an official letter to Tommaso. It stated that he had 3 days to return everything stolen, or he would be subject to civil and criminal prosecution. We printed the document, signed it, and David called a courier to deliver the letter in person, with a signature required. As I was leaving, he stopped me at the door, looked at me closely, and said quietly, "You're a strong woman, but don't let him make you doubt it." I returned home and waited. The first day passed in agonizing anticipation. I was straining for every ring of the phone, but there was no call. On the second day, I was still hoping. By the third, I already knew he wouldn't call, and indeed, 3 days passed, and I didn't hear a word from Tommaso, not a call, not a message, not even an apology. Then, on the fourth morning, I went to the police. The station was crowded, and it smelled of paper and metal. The young officer took my statement, listened attentively, and, without asking any unnecessary questions, accepted the evidence, videos, receipts, photographs. "We'll begin an investigation today, miss," he said, nodding at me with a sympathy that was surprisingly sincere. Only a few hours had passed when my phone rang. I picked it up and immediately heard a scream. "What have you done?" Tommaso's voice was distorted with rage. "The police just arrived at our house. They detained us. They're going to interrogate us." "Are you crazy?" Rachel's shriek echoed in the background. "You're ruining our lives." I replied calmly, "You had 3 days to return my things, Tommaso, you chose not to." He hesitated, and despair crept into his voice. "Ginevra, please stop, we'll return everything, just drop the charges." "No," I said and hung up. An hour later, David called. "The police want you to come," he said. "Tommaso and Rachel are at the station, asking to see you." We arrived together and were led into a small room with white walls and a table in the center. Tommaso and Rachel were already seated at it, an officer nearby. Tommaso looked broken, red eyes, hands shaking. Rachel was crying, her mascara smearing. "Ginevra," he began hoarsely, "please drop the charges, we'll return everything today." I looked at him for a long time, not recognizing the boy I'd once held by the hand, walking him to school. "You should have returned everything 4 days ago." When I asked, I replied quietly, "We made a mistake." Rachel sobbed, hiding her face, "We're so sorry, please don't do this to us." I looked at them both, at the brother for whom I'd lived half my life, at the woman who had destroyed everything between us. "I won't drop the charges," I said calmly. "You will return my property, because the law demands it, but it's over between us. Tommaso, you betrayed me." I stood, my legs shaking, but my voice remained firm. David stood after me, and we left, leaving them at the table, their heads bowed. 2 days later, David called again. His voice was businesslike but gentle. "They were released on bail," he said. "They pleaded guilty and struck a deal with the prosecutor. The trial is scheduled for next month." The month flew by in a blur. At the trial, I sat in the front row, my back straight, next to David. The judge heard all the evidence, videos, receipts, photographs. Tommaso and Rachel sat at the defendant's table, pale, their faces drawn. The judge was stern but fair. He sentenced them to probation and ordered them to pay $1,500 each, as well as to return all their property and pay damages for the broken lock, damaged flooring, and porch railing. After the hearing, I returned to David's office. I sat in his leather chair and looked out the window, where the evening city glowed softly. I need to change my will, I finally said. David looked up. Everything I left Tommaso, everything I was supposed to leave him, I want to cut it out, completely. I'm setting up a trust, and after my death, everything will go to charity. David nodded silently, writing something down in his notebook, then looked up and said calmly, I'll prepare the documents and send Tommaso an official notice. Everything will be legally perfect. I looked at him and, feeling a strange sense of relief welling up inside me, said, I want him to know that he's no longer my heir. Let him read it in black and white. David said nothing, merely lowering his gaze slightly, as if respecting my decision and not wanting to comment on the pain behind it. 2 days after I changed my will, he actually sent a notice, an official, cold document that clearly and unambiguously stated that Tommaso was no longer my heir, and all my assets and property would go to a charitable trust upon my death. I knew this decision was final, and as I signed the papers, I felt like I was putting the finishing touches on a long, exhausting story. That same evening, as I sat in the living room with a cup of tea, listening to the wind pick up outside, there was a sudden knock at the door, loud, insistent, sharp, not the kind that accompanies a visit from a neighbor or the postman, but the kind that conveys anger. My heart sank, but I went over and peered through the peephole. Tommaso and Rachel stood on the threshold. His face was twisted with anger, hers was tear-stained, her eyes glistening with hurt and tension. I opened the door slightly, still holding the chain, and asked quietly, What do you want? You changed the will? He cried out, unable to contain himself. Is that true? His voice rose to a scream, his face flushed. Are you serious, Ginevra? I'm your only family. Everything should go to me. You stole from me what was rightfully mine. I couldn't help but laugh, bitterly, joylessly. Stolen? I repeated, you broke into my house, Tommaso, you took every single thing, every plate, every chair I bought. Why would I leave you anything? He clenched his fists and stepped closer, but the chain held the door. It was a mistake, he said, barely keeping his voice in check. We already apologized. No, I replied calmly, you didn't apologize. You returned my things only because the court ordered you to do so, not because you were ashamed. At that moment, Rachel stepped forward. Her face was pale, her eyes red, and her voice was false, tinged with self-pity. I'm pregnant, she said with a sob. We're having a baby. You're going to be an aunt. Do you really not care? I looked at her for a long moment, silently, feeling a weariness welling up inside me, so heavy it felt like it was squeezing my chest from the inside. Congratulations, I finally said, but that doesn't change what you did. You're so cruel. Rachel exclaimed, anger lacing her voice. You called the police on us, forced us to court, shamed us in front of everyone, and now you're disinheriting us. It was never your inheritance, I replied. It's my money, my life. I'll decide where it goes. We need that money. Rachel raised her voice, stepping closer to the door. We can barely pay the bills, we have a mortgage, expenses, and now a child. That's not my problem, I said quietly but firmly. Tommaso grabbed the edge of the door, as if trying to force his way in. Change the will back, he screamed. You owe me. I owe you? I repeated, feeling the pent-up rage welling up inside me. I raised you, Tommaso. I paid for everything, your clothes, your food, your college, your car, your apartment, your wedding, the down payment on your house. I gave you 17 years of my life. And you dare say I owe you more? He looked away, but his grip on the door was still tight. You were supposed to take care of me, he muttered dully. It was your responsibility. I looked at him in surprise, as if I were seeing a stranger for the first time. My duty, I said, was to raise you until you were 18. Everything I did after that was an act of love, not duty, and for that, you repaid me with theft. We made one mistake. Rachel cried, as if hoping repetition would make her words true. Once. No, I replied, you made many mistakes. You, Rachel, never returned a single thing you took. You discarded old furniture, then stole new. You broke into my home, ruined my peace, damaged my property, and not once, not once. Have you ever truly apologized? Tommaso exhaled loudly, taking a step back. Okay, he said, I'm sorry. Is that what you want to hear? His words rang hollow, like a stone dropped into a well. Too late, I said. My voice was quiet, but every word was harder than steel. I've had enough. Don't write to me anymore. Don't call me. If you continue to harass me, I'll sue and get a restraining order. I slammed the door and turned the key. A few minutes of pounding continued behind the door, desperate, angry, but I didn't move. I sat down on the couch and listened to the knocks grow quieter until they died away completely. A week later, a new security system was installed in my house: cameras, an alarm, motion sensors. I should have done this years ago. Now everything looked the same. The furniture and appliances were back, as the court ordered. Everything was in its place, but still, the house never felt the same again. My house looked like it used to: cozy, well-kept, full of light and order. But despite all this, I didn't feel normal. On the outside, everything seemed fine. The polished furniture gleamed, fresh flowers stood in vases, the radio played softly, but inside, a strange, painful emptiness reigned. I felt devastated to the very depths of my soul. I had lost more than just a brother. I had lost the last person I could call family. The one I lived for, the one I got up for in the morning, the one I hadn't allowed myself any rest or relaxation for so many years. Sometimes, late at night, when the shadows deepened outside the windows, I began to doubt whether I had been too harsh, whether I had gone too far, whether I should have forgiven. But if I only briefly recalled how I had returned home that terrible evening, to an empty, ransacked, upturned house, the doubts vanished. I recalled the note Tommaso had left on the wall, his casual words about taking my things because he needed them. More, I remembered Rachel screaming down the phone that I should be ashamed for wanting to take back what was mine. And then I realized, no, I wasn't cruel. I was too soft, too indulgent. I'd allowed myself to be used for too long. Several weeks passed. Life was gradually returning to normal, though the silence of the house felt different, echoing, cold, yet liberating. Then one day the phone rang. The name of my aunt, my mother's older sister, popped up on the screen. We rarely spoke, so the call surprised me. Ginevra, dear, she began cautiously, I need to talk to you about Tommaso. I froze, my heart sank unpleasantly, but my voice remained calm. What's wrong with him? I asked. He and Rachel came to see me. My aunt continued, they're very upset about what happened between you. I smiled, though the laugh sounded bitter. I'm sure they are, I said quietly. He asked me to help him make peace with you, she added after a pause. He says he wants to apologize properly. He's had plenty of chances to apologize, I replied, and each time he chose not to. Aunt sighed heavily. But, Ginevra, he is your brother. Family is important. Sometimes you have to be able to forgive. I gripped the phone tighter, looking out the window, where the wind fluttered the curtains. He didn't think family was important when he broke into my house, I said wearily. People make mistakes, she muttered, especially when they get confused. It wasn't a mistake, I interrupted. It was a choice. He chose to steal from me. He chose to lie. He chose to put his desires above our connection, so don't call it a mistake. There was a pause on the line. I could almost hear Aunt shaking her head. What do you want me to tell him? She finally asked. I took a deep breath. Tell him I don't want to make peace. Tell him I've had enough. For 17 years I cared for him. I gave him everything I had, my strength, my money, my youth, my time, and he didn't appreciate a single thing I did. It's all over, okay, my aunt said quietly after a short silence. I'll tell him. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time, holding the phone in my hand. Thoughts swirled in my head, one after another, like leaves blown by the wind. I was 42, and suddenly, with surprise, I realized that the last 17 years of my life hadn't belonged entirely to me. I lived for Tommaso. I never traveled, never allowed myself to fall in love, never had a real relationship, never did anything that brought me joy. Everything revolved around him, his needs, his problems, his future, and for the first time in all this time, a desire awakened in me. To live, not just to exist, but to truly live. I opened my laptop and, almost without thinking, began browsing travel websites. Vibrant photographs flashed across the screen: golden sand beaches, narrow European streets, cruises under scarlet sails, the azure waters of the Caribbean. all those places I'd dreamed of visiting but never allowed myself to go to because I was always too busy with work and caring for my brother. I spent a long time choosing. Until my gaze settled on a photo of Hawaii, sea, sun, frangipani flowers, and a smile instantly appeared on my face. 2 weeks, all inclusive. I didn't give myself time to change my mind. I simply clicked book. When I told my friend Aurora about it, she practically screamed with joy upon hearing it. Finally, she said, laughing, "You deserve a vacation, Ginevra, you've worked nonstop for so many years." I smiled back. "I know, I think it's time to start living for myself." "And Tommaso?" she asked after a pause, "have you heard anything from him?" "No," I answered calmly, "and I don't want to." I felt these words becoming more than just an answer, they were turning into a boundary I'd finally drawn. "That chapter of my life is over," I added. Aurora nodded, her gaze turning serious. "And rightly so," she said, "he took advantage of you for too long." I laughed softly, because there wasn't a shred of exaggeration in her words. Yes, Tommaso had taken advantage of me, and I'd allowed it, not because I was stupid, but because I loved him, because I believed that's what families do, that love and support are unconditional. But now I knew, a real family doesn't steal. A real family doesn't betray, a real family appreciates, thanks, holds your hand when you're going through hard times. Tommaso was no longer my family, he had become just a shadow, a reminder of those years when I sacrificed myself for the comfort of others. Now I was done, it was time to think about myself, time to allow myself to dream, to travel, to laugh, to feel. It was time to start living the way I always wanted, for myself, not for someone who didn't appreciate me. The weeks dragged on, and I increasingly caught myself thinking that my life had truly begun to change. It was becoming different, lighter, almost weightless, as if I'd been carrying an unbearable burden on my shoulders for decades and had finally allowed myself to shed it. I no longer waited for calls, no longer flinched at every notification on my phone, no longer anxiously checked the locks on the doors before bed. I hadn't heard from Tommaso or Rachel, they had vanished from my life, as if they'd vanished into thin air, and, strangely enough, this absence brought me peace. The restraining order David had filed worked flawlessly, my security system was now fully in place, cameras monitored every corner of my home, the alarm responded to the slightest movement, and for the first time in years, I could say to myself, yes, I finally felt safe. My home was mine again, not just legally, but also emotionally and spiritually. All the furniture and appliances were back in their proper places, every single thing was where it belonged, but, strangely enough, everything felt different. It wasn't the objects that had changed, this house was truly mine now, not because I'd bought it, but because I'd regained the right to be the master of my own life. I went to work as usual, but without the debilitating sense of duty that had previously driven me to take on everything and everyone. I stopped staying late, stopped agreeing to extra projects, and my colleagues quickly noticed. "You seem different, Ginevra," Marco from the accounting department once said, "as if an invisible weight had been lifted from you." I smiled at him and replied simply, "I really am happier." And it was the purest truth. I began doing things I'd never allowed myself to do before. I joined the book club at the city library. We'd meet in the evenings, drink jasmine tea, and discuss novels like schoolgirls, debating the characters' personalities. I signed up for drawing classes, bought myself a set of watercolors, and, for the first time since my youth, let my hand simply glide across the paper. Without thinking about how it looked, I began having dinner with friends, not at home, alone, with a plate of cheap pasta, but in small trattorias that smelled of fresh basil and seafood, and were filled with music and laughter. I bought myself beautiful clothes, real ones, soft fabrics, sophisticated colors, things that emphasized my femininity rather than concealed it. I got my hair done at an expensive salon, where the hairdresser said with a slight accent, "Your hair deserves some love," and I suddenly realized how long it had been since anyone had said anything like that to me. I treated myself to a spa day, warm oils, the scent of lavender, music that made me want to cry with relief. For the first time in 17 years, I lived for myself, and the feeling was both unfamiliar and incredibly sweet. My trip to Hawaii was approaching. Every time I looked at the calendar, I felt a joyful excitement, like a child before a holiday. I bought new swimsuits, bright, bold, as if meant for a different, free woman. I bought sundresses, light sandals, a large straw hat, I planned everything, from transportation to excursions, from dinners on the beach to walks along the coast. It seemed to me that a life was finally beginning ahead, a life where there was room only for me and my breath. And then, just when everything seemed settled, my uncle called, my father's older brother, a man with whom I had always been polite but not close. His voice on the phone was cautious, as if he were preparing for a refusal. Ginevra, I heard what happened to Tommaso, he began. He asked me to talk to you. I immediately felt weariness welling up inside, as if an old pain were opening its doors again. I'm not interested, I replied dryly. Just hear me out, he asked, and with a sigh, I agreed. He's your brother, my uncle said. Yes, he's made mistakes, but he's still part of the family. I grinned, looking at my reflection in the window. He stole from me, I said quietly. He broke into my house and took everything I had. I know, he replied, and it was wrong, but maybe you could give him another chance. Why? I asked, so he could steal from me again? So Rachel could come back and take what's left? He's having a baby soon, my uncle said, a little more gently. Don't you want to be a part of your nephew or niece's life? I thought for a moment. Tommaso's child, my brother's child, blood of my blood, but no, I shook my head, though he couldn't see it. No, I said, I don't want to. This child has parents, they can raise him themselves, just like I once raised Tommaso. There was silence on the phone, then my uncle said, You're very cold. I smiled, but there was no joy in it. I'm not cold, I'm a realist, I replied. Tommaso never appreciated anything I did for him, he just took and took, never giving anything in return. I'm tired of being a donor to other people's needs. My uncle tried something else. He's having financial difficulties. It's hard for him and Rachel without your help. Okay, I replied calmly. Maybe they'll learn to budget. Maybe they'll finally understand what it means to live within your means. After all, I somehow managed when I was supporting both of us. When the call ended, I sat in silence for a long time. The walls of my house were calm, the lamp softly illuminated the room, and I thought about how it seemed everyone around me, family, acquaintances, even friends, wanted me to forgive Tommaso. My aunt, my uncle, perhaps someone else from my distant relatives would write soon, but none of them understood what I'd been through. No one saw me return home to empty shelves, scattered things, empty drawers, as if someone had ripped a chunk of my own breath from my life. No one had raised Tommaso, paid for his education, sat up all night counting pennies. No one had denied themselves for him, therefore, no one had the right to tell me how I should feel. I slowly looked around my house, my beautiful, recently renovated home, where every detail, every line, and every shadow belonged only to me. My gaze slid over the light walls, the polished surfaces of the furniture, the soft shine of the new dishes, and I felt that deep, quiet joy that only the awareness of one's own labor and one's own right to peace can give. This house was my refuge, my little world, which I built myself, step by step, year after year, at the cost of sleepless nights, tired mornings, and long years without real rest. And now, finally, it was truly mine, not only in documents, but in my soul. Tommaso would never cross this threshold again. Rachel would never touch a single thing of mine again. They disappeared from my life, and with them, the heaviness that had been pressing on my heart, that suited me. Moreover, for the first time in a long time, I felt real relief, that special lightness when you don't expect trouble and don't try to save anyone. A few days before my trip to Hawaii, Aurora came to my house for dinner. I made pasta with basil and fresh tomatoes, put out a bottle of white wine, and we sat in my cozy dining room, chatting about small things. The faint aroma of garlic hung in the air, candles softly lit the table, and everything seemed surprisingly calm. Have you heard from Tommaso? Aurora asked, shaking her glass. I shook my head. No, I replied, and, frankly, I hope I never do. Do you think he realized what he's done? She asked, looking at me searchingly. I sighed. I don't know, I said, and frankly, I don't care. He's not my problem anymore. Aurora smiled, a little sadly, but with approval. You seem different, Ginevra, calmer, as if the world has finally stopped tormenting you. I nodded. Yes, I said quietly, for the first time in 17 years, I am free. I can breathe, I can do whatever I want, I can spend my money on myself, I can make decisions without thinking about how it will affect Tommaso. And what are you going to do with all this freedom? She asked, resting her cheek on her hand. I smiled, feeling it borne not on my face, but somewhere deep inside. Everything, I answered. I will travel, I will meet people, I will learn to listen to myself. I want to finally understand who I am, beyond the fact that I am Tommaso's sister. After she left, I sat for a long time on the couch, looking out the window as evening slowly turned to night. I thought about the past, all those years spent toiling, being rejected, waiting endlessly for gratitude that never came. I recalled those countless nights of overtime, when my eyes ached with fatigue and my only thought was how to pay the bills and keep my brother from going into poverty. I recalled how I gave up meetings, trips, simple joys so that Tommaso could live better than me. I gave him everything I could: love, care, money, time, myself, and he trampled it all, turned it to dust, deceiving and stealing, erasing years of my faith in him. But now, sitting in the silence of my home, I no longer felt anger, only weariness and final acceptance. I'd had enough of being used, enough of sacrificing for those who don't know how to appreciate, enough of living for the needs of others. Tommaso made his choice when he broke into my house and took what wasn't his. He chose money over family, lies over trust, himself over us. Now it was my turn to choose, and I chose myself. The trip to Hawaii felt like a rebirth for me. From the moment the plane rose above the clouds, I felt like I'd left all the baggage of my past behind. Among old grievances and memories, I spent 2 weeks by the ocean. The sea whispered, the wind caressed my skin, the sun warmed my bones. In the mornings, I sipped coffee while watching the waves crash against the rocks, and in the evenings, I read books on the veranda as the pink sky descended over the water. I snorkeled, observing amazing sea creatures, rode in a helicopter over emerald mountains and golden beaches, ate fresh fruit and dishes the taste of which I will never forget. I laughed, talked to strangers, listened to music, danced barefoot in the sand, and suddenly realized, this was life, the real life I'd always put off. And for the first time in years, I felt like myself, not a caretaker, not a victim, not someone's sister, but simply Ginevra, a woman who had finally allowed herself to be happy. Returning home, I felt light and strong. I knew I could do anything, if I wanted. I could start dating. If I wanted, I could go somewhere else. If I wanted, I could change jobs or start my own business. Everything I did now was just for me, not for Tommaso, not for anyone else, and it was amazing, knowing that every step I took belonged to me. I never spoke to Tommaso again. Occasionally, I heard brief news from relatives. He and Rachel had had a baby girl. They said things weren't easy for them, that finances were tight, but they were coping, and I felt nothing, no pity, no anger, not even pain, just a silence that felt like peace. They had made their choice, and I had made mine, and finally, after so many years, I could say with confidence, I am happy.